in the days when rivers still whispered secrets to those who listened, and mountains were said to breathe once every 100 years, there lived a small village nestled between two hills, called Ateri. It was a village of red soil and golden millet, where the people believed, with the fullness of their hearts, in the words of the oracle who dwelt in the great stone shrine at the village's edge. For 3 generations, the oracle had spoken for the gods, and for 3 generations, the people of Ateri had bowed before her, believing that to defy her was to defy heaven itself. Into this village was born a boy named Ekon, the son of a poor potter and a woman who sold herbs by the roadside. From the moment he could walk, Ekon was different. Where other children bowed their heads, the instant the oracle's shadow crossed the market square, Ekon would tilt his chin upward and simply watch. His mother would pinch his arm and hiss at him to lower his eyes, but something in the boy's spirit refused to fold, as though his bones themselves were carved from stubborn wood. The oracle of Ateri was a woman named Ijodo, tall and draped in cowrie shells, her eyes lined with white chalk, so that she seemed to see through the world into the realm of spirits. The villagers brought her their harvests, their firstborn goats, their silver coins wrapped in cloth, believing that these offerings kept the gods content and the rains falling. But there was a secret buried beneath Ijodo's shrine, a secret only she and her closest attendants knew. The gods had gone silent years ago. What she spoke now were not divine truths, but calculations, whispers gathered from market gossip, threats disguised as prophecy, and blessings sold to the highest bidder. Ekon's father, a humble man named Baraku, had once been the finest potter in 3 villages. But when a drought came and the harvests failed, Ijodo declared that the gods were displeased, because Baraku had shaped a clay figure resembling a forbidden spirit. It was a lie, spun from nothing, yet the village turned on him overnight. His pots were smashed in the square. His customers vanished like morning mist. And when Baraku dared to protest, dared to ask for proof of this divine anger, Ijodo simply raised her chalk-lined eyes and said that doubt itself was the greatest sin. Baraku died 3 winters later, his spirit crushed long before his body followed, and it was Ekon, barely 12 years old, who stood at the burial mound and made a silent vow. He would not bow, not to Ijodo, not to her shells, not to a power that fed itself on fear. Years passed. Ekon grew into a young man, known throughout Ateri for his sharp tongue and sharper eyes, a woodcarver like his father before him. Though this was another point of shame in the village, for people whispered that the son of the cursed potter should not be trusted with fire or blade. Yet, whenever the villagers gathered in the square, and the oracle passed through on her litter, carried by 4 young men, every head dropped low except one. Ekon stood tall, arms folded, watching her the way a hunter watches a wolf. He has not yet decided whether to trust or to kill. This defiance did not go unnoticed. Ijodo, who had built her entire kingdom on obedience, found herself strangely unsettled by a mere boy who refused to be afraid of her. She sent her attendants to warn him. She sent elders to plead with his mother. She even, in a moment of desperation disguised as generosity, offered him a position as her personal carver, promising wealth beyond his imagining if only he would kneel before the shrine just once, publicly, so the village could see that even the fiercest heart eventually surrendered. Ekon refused. It was this refusal that set the true tragedy into motion. For pride wounded is a dangerous thing, and Ijodo's pride was a wound that festered into rot. She began to speak of Ekon during her prophecies, subtly at first, hinting that a shadow walked among them, a boy whose heart housed a demon, jealous of the gods. The villagers, hungry as always for someone to blame when misfortune struck, began to look at Ekon differently. When a child fell ill with fever, mothers whispered his name. When the well ran low, old men muttered that the boy's insolence had angered the spirits of water. Ekon's closest friend, a young woman named Chidinma, the blacksmith's daughter, tried desperately to warn him. She had always loved him quietly, the way one loves a flame, both drawn to its warmth and terrified of its danger. "Bow to her, Ekon," she begged him one night beneath the baobab tree. "Not because she deserves it. Bow because the village needs to see you bow. Your pride will bury you the way it buried your father." But Ekon only shook his head. "My father bowed his whole life," he said, "and it did not save him. I would rather stand and fall than kneel and still be broken." Chidinma wept, for she understood then that the boy she loved would not be saved from himself. The betrayal came not from Ijodo directly, but from someone far closer to Ekon's heart. His own cousin, a young man named Tariq, who had long envied Ekon's carvings, his reputation, and even Chidinma's affection, went secretly to the oracle's shrine. He told Ijodo that Ekon had been carving a wooden idol in secret, one meant to mock her power, one meant to be unveiled before the whole village during the coming harvest festival to expose her prophecies as lies. It was a fabrication, born entirely of jealousy, but Ijodo did not need truth. She needed only the excuse. On the night of the harvest festival, before the entire village gathered beneath torches and drums, Ijodo rose from her litter and pointed her chalk-white finger at Ekon. She declared that the gods had shown her a vision, that the boy carried darkness meant to poison Ateri's future, that unless he was cast out beyond the river, unless his workshop was burned and his tools broken, the coming year would bring plague upon every household. The village, terrified, turned on him instantly. Even those who had once admired his courage now saw only a threat to their children's survival. His workshop was set ablaze that very night. His carvings, years of his father's memory poured into wood, turned to ash within moments. Chidinma tried to stand before the flames, screaming that this was madness, that Tariq had lied, but her own father dragged her back, warning her that to defend Ekon now was to invite the same curse upon their own house. Ekon was driven from the village at dawn, stones thrown at his back, his mother's cries swallowed by the wind. He walked for 3 days through forest and dust, surviving on bitter roots and the memory of his father's unbroken spirit, until he collapsed at the edge of a neighboring village, more dead than alive. It was there that fate, in its strange and patient way, began to turn. The village that found him, called Obara, was ruled not by fear of an oracle, but by a council of elders who valued questions as much as answers. They nursed Ekon back to health, and in time, he shared his story. An old woman among them, a healer named Amara, listened closely and then told him something that shattered his understanding of everything he had endured. Ijodo was not born an oracle, she said. She was born in this very village, decades ago, and she fled after being caught faking a vision to steal grain from a dying family. She did not speak for God's boy. She never did. She speaks only for herself. Ekon carried this truth back toward Atiri, like a blade sharpened over years of suffering. But he did not return alone. He returned with proof gathered from Obara's oldest records and testimonies, and with a plan far more patient than the wrath that had once driven him into exile. He did not storm into the village square, shouting accusations. Instead, he waited for the next public prophecy, when the entire village had gathered once more beneath the shrine, and he walked forward calmly, without fear, and asked Ijodo a single question in front of everyone. He asked her to speak the true name of the village where she was born. Silence fell like a held breath. Ijiodo's chalk-lined eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something the villagers had never seen in her before. Fear. She stammered, tried to deflect with talk of blasphemy and demons, but Ikon simply continued, revealing the testimony of the elders of Obara, the story of the stolen grain, the manufactured visions, the decades of lies stitched together from nothing but fear and desperation. The crowd that had once thrown stones at Ikon now turned their eyes toward the woman they had worshipped for a lifetime. Chidinma stepped forward first, her voice trembling but clear, confirming what she had always suspected but never dared to say. Then, one by one, others spoke, memories of prophecies that conveniently aligned with Ijodo's own interests, blessings sold for coin, curses invented to punish those who question her. Tariq, watching from the crowd's edge, felt the weight of his own betrayal settle upon him like a stone around his neck. When the elders demanded to know who had first accused Ekon of carving a mocking idol, he could not lie forever. His confession broke him publicly, his jealousy laid bare before the very village he had hoped to impress. He was not stoned nor exiled, for Ikon, remembering his father's unjust suffering, asked only that the truth be known, not that vengeance be taken. Yet, Tariq carried his shame for the rest of his days, watching from a distance as the cousin he had betrayed became the very thing the village needed most. As for Ijodo, her shells were stripped from her shoulders, her chalk washed from her eyes with water drawn from the well she had once claimed. The gods protected only through her mercy. She was not killed, for the elders of Atere, humbled by their own blindness, chose instead a harder punishment. She was made to live among the very people she had deceived, without title, without power, watching each day as the village slowly healed from wounds she had carved into it. Ekon rebuilt his father's workshop with his own hands, and into its very doorframe he carved a single phrase that would be remembered in Ateri for generations. Truth bows to no one, and no one should bow to a lie. Chidinma stood beside him as he carved it, her hand resting upon his, and the village that had once cast him into the wilderness now brought their children to hear his story, not as a warning against defiance, but as a lesson in the quiet, unbearable cost of courage and the far greater cost of silence. And so it is told, even now, in villages where rivers still whisper and mountains still breathe, that somewhere between two hills stood a boy who refused to bow, not out of arrogance, but because he understood, long before anyone else dared admit it, that some thrones are built entirely of fear, and fear, however tall it stands, always kneels before the truth.